Welcome, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. That music just has me feeling amped now. That was like incredibly inspirational music. Anyway, super happy that everybody is joining us today. We have a great session prepared for you today on networking and security in multi-cloud environments. And I'm joined today. So first of all, my name is Berger. I look after product marketing for our software firewalls here at Palo Alto Networks. So that's our virtual firewalls and our containerized firewalls. I'm joined by my counterpart, head of product marketing from Alkira, David Klebanoff, as well as the stars of our show today, members of our esteemed customer, Koch Business Solutions. So we've got Chris Gregg and Matt Hogue. Chris is network security analyst at Koch, and Matt is chief technology officer. So a couple housekeeping things before we dive in here. Q&A. This is going to be a pretty informal conversation. We're going to be talking about all the awesome stuff that Koch has been doing as part of their business to enable cloud adoption and enable network security in the cloud. So we're going to be going back and forth. We're going to be having an informal conversation, diving into all of the cool use cases and ways that Koch has approached this. Feel free to ask questions in the Q&A window. We may or may not end up having time to address them on the call, but if we do, we'll get to them. That'll be great. If not, we will be sure to follow up with you all and answer your questions. So definitely want to encourage participation in that way. Feel free to ask as many questions as you want for either myself, David, Matt, or Chris. So with that, I think we'll dive right in here. Matt, Chris, can you guys introduce yourselves and tell us a little bit about your role at Koch Industries?
Yeah, thanks, Alex. Glad to be here. I'm Matt Hogue, and as Alex mentioned, I'm the Chief Technology Officer for Koch Business Solutions. I've been at Koch for about 22 years, serving in various different technology-related roles. Our organization, Koch Business Solutions, is a capability within Koch that provides services like IT, HR, finance to the rest of the Koch companies.
Yeah, and my name is Chris Gregg. I also work for Koch Global Service or Koch Business Solutions as a network security analyst. I'm a product owner for the Palo Altos that we service here at Koch, and have worked close with Alkira on kind of onboarding both products to our environment and using it as a security capability for us.
Yeah, and I think it's important just to note that one of the reasons we wanted to, pull this group together today is we really wanted to paint the picture about networking and security coming together, right? And that's going to be a theme throughout the course of this discussion. So that's why we have Chris and Matt kind of representing both sides of the coin here from a networking and security perspective. And I just wanted to set that stage right up front because you'll see it emerge throughout the conversation today.
Right. I fully agree with you, Alex. We know that networking and security, whether it talks in the cloud or not in the cloud, it's definitely tied to the hip and has been tied to the hip for forever, right? So definitely looking forward to this conversation, and good to see you guys, Chris, Matt, and Alex. Thank you for the introductions. So I wanted to ask you a question about the digital transformation. So we know that cloud continues to play a very significant role in, for the enterprises of all sizes that are embarking in this digital transformation journey. So I know that you guys are no strangers to that as well. So can you talk a little bit, and I guess both of you, right? Because there's a security angle and there's a networking angle, right? Can you talk a bit about what were the challenges that you were facing on your kind of a cloud adoption journey for networking and security as you went through this transition?
Yeah, I'll give you kind of a 50,000 foot view of kind of where we've come from and where we are, and then I think Chris can probably give a little bit more color on some of the challenges. So when we started this journey, we were, much like other businesses, had a very traditional network. We were centralized in our data center. We're connected through MPLS. We had very few egress points, and we used those as security control points, right? And as we began our move to the cloud, we found that all of those things were a problem. And so, in our first cloud on-ramp deployments where, we were trying to get workloads migrated out of the data center, we built everything in our data centers. We use direct connects to AWS and our preferred cloud partner. And this let us move those large workloads and those massive data stores to the cloud, but it also kept us very tied to our data centers. The security was still pretty centralized there. In our second deployment, our evolution, if you will, we virtualized everything within the cloud itself, which, it really it opened up communications to our remote sites and our end users to directly access those workloads without having to hairpin through the data center. But at that point, we had built something that was effective, but extremely complex. And not only that, but very AWS specific. Anybody who's done much in the cloud will understand that, AWS and Google and Azure are all different in how they do things, especially in the networking space. And it's a challenge, right? So what we found was continuing to evolve and innovate on those services, and scale was a real challenge for us. Alex, if you could bring up our comparison slide, I can give a little bit better picture of this. So the top is representation. That's the architectural view of our cloud on-ramp in Amazon. And that's one, right? So we run a large network that's grown up through acquisition. And because of some of the limitations that we found, we have 7 instances of that model running in AWS US East. And so when we met Alkira and we found this concept of the network cloud that really, embodied what we were looking for and done so in an as a service way, what we found is, the bottom, we were able to go from that massive complexity on top and months of work to a very simplified, digital design and quick to deploy. And it took us, so the first time we actually got our hands on the Alkira platform, we were sitting in a conference room, and it took us an afternoon to recreate one of our existing in the cloud on-ramps that had taken us months to develop, deploy, and operationalize.
Right. Yeah, I know that you talked about that in the past as well, and I think you touched on that point again, is that sort of the complexity of a do-it-yourself. You weren't really in the business of building these things, right? You wanted to continue, conducting your business, right? And this was just getting in your way.
Yeah, for sure. That's something that we really strive for, is finding, what are we good at, and what should we be working on? And, clearly this isn't something we don't have any products in the space of networking or security. And this isn't something that, we should be spending this amount of time on. And that's where we look for strategic partners like Alkira and Palo Alto to really help drive us forward faster and let us focus on our business.
Right.
Yeah, and really focusing on our business. So we service lots and lots of different types of customers that have different business goals and desires and want to do spaces in lots of different industries. And so, we really value the ability to move quickly and to do that at scale. And with what we had done up to this point with living kind of in AWS, it's a robust and really good product, but as our businesses are looking to move more resources into the cloud and to move to different platforms and to try to onboard all those resources, we're just not moving fast enough. So kind of the introduction of both the Palo Alto and the Alkira platform together has really enabled us to kind of really start to look at what that looks like and to really help our customers accomplish their business goals.
Yeah, I'd be curious to double click on that a little bit from the security perspective, Chris. What were you guys doing prior, because I know, prior to Alkira engaging, you guys have been a long-term customer of ours for quite a while, using our firewalls in numerous ways. I'm curious to get a sense from your perspective, what you were looking for out of those, virtual firewalls in the public cloud, how you were using them, and, why you chose to augment the native capabilities of AWS and then ultimately, the other clouds that you're moving to with, a next generation firewall. I think that's a common question that we get all the time. Well, why do I need a next gen firewall if AWS has the native firewall capabilities that they have and Azure has theirs, and et cetera, et cetera. So I'd be curious to double click on that piece a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. As you kind of look at like traditional implementations of like the data center. So you have applications and servers and data that lives kind of on-prem behind these firewalls that you've implemented because that's the way you've had to do it traditionally. And kind of the temptation that people have as they migrate those things to AWS is that they see the connectivity is just like it exists already. So the temptation is to not have to implement those security controls in order to create that buffer between you and the big scary internet. And so I think the advantage that Palo Alto really brings to the table, and the thing that we've really valued of implementing it into the cloud is with that next gen capability with your guys' start protection feature of being able to implement a layer 7 protection to really look into packets to see are there any indicators of compromise or different signatures that might be a potential threat to the environment that cloud providers aren't able to provide with their security groups or anything like that, which is more of like it's more like an ACL than anything else.
Sure. Yeah, and I think that diagram that Alex just showed recently, right? That complexity that was portrayed and how you guys were doing when you were building it, the transport hubs, the previous version of it. It definitely, the firewalls were very integral part of that, right? So as much as you had the networking complexity, basically all of that was just one hairy mess for you guys to deploy, manage, and until you've moved to a different architecture, the as a service architecture.
Oh yeah, I mean, when you look at like the networking security journey of that, I think when you look at the Alkira platform, like a lot of those difficulties with deployment and being effective and moving faster really kind of solved.
Yeah, and I think as you look at kind of the breadth and scale of what we've moved to the cloud and what we continue to develop there, right? Continuing to drive down more digital footprint for our businesses, investing more in technology and technology related companies. I'll say simple firewalls, the native firewalls that come in the cloud deployments, they're enticing, potentially from a couple different perspectives, but they're not adequate for that diversity. And that's where, we really rely on those capabilities from Palo Alto. And then, as we continue to migrate workloads towards Alkira, it's that flexibility and speed, right? So it's moving our technical individuals up the value chain, right? So we don't have to worry about things like physical wiring or life cycle or stuff like that. We can focus on the policies that protect our business.
Yeah, and I think also just to kind of finish the thought too, I mean, just the native solutions that are available compared to what Palo Alto has to offer. I mean, just the robustness of the product. I mean, the amount of data we process, the different types of applications that we see, and just the diversity of it. Palo Alto is able to offer a product that is really able to really enable that throughput out of security that we really want to see.
Awesome. So we talked about, Matt, you just mentioned kind of up leveling the work that that your team can do, right? Focusing on the stuff that you really want to focus on, like policy writing from a security perspective and network architectures from a networking perspective. I'm curious to understand, how you guys approach network security in these environments. Double clicking on that a little bit. How do you structure things? How do you, I know in the preparation for this, right, one of the things we talked about was, looking at the complexity of the networking that you were faced with and saying, we probably have to flatten our network to some degree. But thanks to how simple Alkira the Alkira platform makes those networking constructs, and of course, augmenting that with the VM series as part of that platform. I'm curious to get a sense from your perspective, how you think about structuring your network security posture these days with all of these different, 7 enterprise level networks, across the world. It's a pretty massive undertaking. So I'm curious to get your thoughts on strategy there.
Yeah, that's, I would say, first of all, that's an evolving thing, right? So when we started this, we absolutely were thinking, man, how do we flatten this network? Because it is, it's immense, right? We've got 130,000 employees across 750 sites across 60 plus countries. and all of that has connectivity and security needs. You know, I don't think from a where we were perspective, it's much different than a lot of traditional networks, right? Where, you know, things were, you know, backhauled. As we start to decentralize that network and move more and more workloads to the cloud, including SaaS, you know, we really needed to, you know, be more internet facing and cloud native. And that's where we started to think a little bit differently around how can we support this, and ingress and egress are two completely different things, right? And from protecting our intellectual property, you know, this is where, from an ingress perspective, those next generation firewalls make a huge difference in how we think about and protect those things. But to your last point there, I think the thought around flattening the network is changing as well, right? So we're thinking a little bit differently about how we connect our networks, or maybe don't connect our networks, because of the thought of the internet, right? How the internet connects changes how we think about connecting our businesses. But also, you know, even with the 7 global WANs that we run, you know, that doesn't represent all of our businesses. We've got groups of businesses within each WAN, potentially, depending on acquisition, right? And today, I think there's definitely a growing desire for more segmentation, not only between businesses, but within a business, between business units. And historically, that's been, you know, it's been very challenging to even think about. But now, to your point, as we can, you know, draw a new line on the Alkira dashboard and create a new segment and carry that through the Palo Alto, and apply security policies, you know, I'll say simplistically. I don't want to speak for Chris, but simplistically, in my view, for sure, right? I think that leads us to think about, man, if we could segment more, what might that look like, right? From a blast radius, from a security, from you know, from all those aspects.
Yeah. So one thing I can add to, and I know, Chris, you have probably a whole lot of more insight to provide here. But one thing I also know that we're seeing around is that with all these application transitions, right, things moving from the data centers to one cloud, sometimes to multi-cloud, some move to SaaS applications, we really see that the entire concept of that centralized security perimeter has kind of dissolved, and because it's dissolving, the needs to provide security at each point that is now distributed and no longer centralized becomes now a challenge. Is that I used to have all this stuff in a data center, right? So that was easy. I had a very clearly identifiable, you know, security perimeter that I have to do, and you know, Palo Alto firewalls will do an awesome job in protecting that perimeter, and have been doing that for a long time now. But now my applications are sprawled everywhere, right? So they're across AWS, multiple regions of AWS. They may be going to Azure and GCP. They may be going to SaaS. That's a direct internet access from my branch offices, right? So all of that transition from the very clearly identified security perimeter into this sort of a very distributed, undefined, can pop up anywhere security perimeter. That's a big fundamental shift for organizations, especially when you're talking about such a distributed deployment as yours. Like you mentioned, you know, 7 distinct networks. I know hundreds of remote sites with thousands of routers, firewalls, applications. So the complexity of an environment, when you layer on top of the fact that you don't have a clearly identified security perimeter anymore, it really creates a challenge from both the networking architecture, how do I support that? And from the security architecture, how do I make it consistent? So
and I think consistency is really the difficult part there, for sure. I mean, when you talk about like the micro perimeter, like, because every need of every perimeter then is unique, because that just is maybe supporting one application or a handful. And so if I try to push policy from another perimeter, it doesn't make sense. So
what does that look like for you, Chris? I mean, from a management perspective, you know, in your, you know, or not even from a necessarily, there's the management aspect, but there's also just the policy definition piece of that, right? Which I think is what you're talking about there. You know, how do I enforce consistency? How do I enforce consistent policies? especially when you're talking about cross clouds, right? That becomes almost insurmountable without something that can extend right across those things. So I'm curious to get your thoughts on that segmentation problem and how policy consistency plays into that.
Yeah, because I think, I mean, we coming from like a security background, like I think the big thing that everyone pushes is segmentation, segmentation, segmentation. Keep the crown jewels away from the resources that are accessible to your customers in case like one device is a compromise and then can get to your crown jewels. And when you deal with these large enterprise networks that have, and not only large enterprise networks, but multiple large enterprise networks, it becomes insurmountable to try to help them all do that effectively. So I mean, given the context, the temptation to go to a super flat network. So talk about the segmentation piece of it. I mean, we've really been trying to explore new ways and methods to be more effective in that space. And the ability to build these micro perimeters has really been a step towards that in terms of trying to remove applications away from data. And so when you talk about like the combined Alkira and Palo Alto platform, that becomes more feasible because you're able to hook in a lot of those different isolated pieces into one central platform, but are still isolated from each other. So I think that's really the first step that we've been able to take towards that really hard problem that we haven't been able to solve up to this point.
Yeah, I think there's something about the abstraction. Yeah, there's something about the abstraction layer, right? The fact that you have an abstraction layer that sort of supersedes, all of the core infrastructure, the physical infrastructure. I mean, obviously, when you're talking clouds, it's not your physical infrastructure, but whatever, right? Like it's that abstraction layer that sort of gives you that centralized view without actually having to physically centralize anything. That's an incredibly powerful, component to the platform approach and Alkira, the Alkira platform in general.
Oh yeah, and then to do it in a way that's not super complicated, because I think any type of solution you try to make from home today to try to accomplish that really hard problem that we've been talking about, I mean, is just insurmountable to try to onboard new resources and to get them up to speed on like what we're doing and how.
Oh, Chris has connection issues.
Yeah. So one of the things I think,
so I mean,
we lost you there for a second, Chris.
Okay, am I back? But yeah, so I mean, just trying to add that level of to reduce the complexity to allow new people to be onboarded.
One of the things I think to think about in this, and it's kind of a subtle point, but I think it's pretty important. So historically we've been pretty, from a IT workload perspective, we've been very North American centric, and our business is significantly not, right? I mean, we're 60 countries around the world, and in a lot of like our manufacturing plants and things like that this is where our compute footprint continued to grow. And arguably that's not wrong. However, as we start to think about cloud and decentralizing the network, the thought quickly shifted to I can do anything anywhere. And that was a different worry, right? And so now this concept of I can regionalize things without standing up my own data center. That's where, so from a compute perspective, anywhere that, the cloud scale guys have compute capability, I can stand up there, but we were still missing that connectivity and security layer. And again, the thought of trying to scale what we had done on our own, which, the comparison slide that we had, one of our executives calls that the spaghetti slide. I prefer to think about it as an engineering marvel, but potato. But I think, trying to scale that around the world in different clouds was a daunting task. So, this is one of the things that Alkira really opens for us. Is that ability to build those connectivity points pretty much anywhere in the world without building a data center, and then layering Palo Alto on there, right? Lets us, back to Chris's point, lets us consistently apply those security policies, and it's not anything anywhere, and it's still a manageable thing that meets business demand.
Yeah, actually, I can say that what you just mentioned, Matt, it's a very interesting point, is that we've been hearing this from quite a few customers, exactly like you said it, is that traditionally, if you wanted to establish your application footprint, you got to go build a data center, right? Now, cloud is ubiquitous, cloud is everywhere. So your applications could be everywhere. So how do you now bring those networking and security capabilities pretty much anywhere in the world without the need, because if you base everything on the physical hardware, then you got to build a data center. You could alleviate some of the pain by going to co-locations. They are distributed in nature, right? So they alleviate a little bit of that pain of centralization, but it's still largely physical undertaking. And I know you guys have done that, or have thought about doing that too. So this idea of completely virtualizing this converged networking and security stack and placing this on demand anywhere in the world, in literally just like you described on a canvas, in a matter of short time, just placing this, drag and dropping this around and saying, yes, I want my network and security to reside in this place, and now my applications are somewhere else, and I want to reside them in that place. So that ability to approach this networking and security in such an agile way, that's not something that has traditionally been there, right? It's networking is always like, you got to drag it behind you. Networking and security, I got to put my routers and my firewalls in place, and I got to get my VLANs working and my routing working, and and see in the next 12 months, right? So
I think another aspect of that we should probably talk about is, so it's funny you mentioned the colos, right? That was actually our first design of our first physical on-ramps is, hey, we'll just deposit these in colos strategically spaced around the world. But when it came to the business decision around that, doing that with physical hardware, first of all, it's the logistics of getting hardware even to the colos, right? But second of all, that's a whole lot of capital up front, right? Where this is the beauty of the cloud is you pay as you go, you pay as you grow, right? And having all this heavy iron sitting in, whether it's my data center or somebody else's data center, that's a huge capital investment up front that you may or may not oversize and overpay, or undersize and have to revisit. And those are the things that the network cloud just, I don't have to worry about those things anymore.
Right. Yeah, you could say right sizing it is the one that is a challenge, because if you overspend, then you overbuilt it. It's nice that you have sort of a room to grow, but it's maybe too much room for you, right? You spend all this capital ahead of time. If you under provision this, then obviously you're not meeting the demand. So you'll be scrambling to meet the needs, right? So where's that sweet spot? And clouds are really good at that because of the elasticity of it. It's just the networking and security hasn't traditionally caught up with that philosophy.
Yeah, I think that point's a really good one, David, right? The fact that clouds really got it right with compute, right? Like that is their bread and butter. That is what makes everything go at this point. And, I think there's the idea of dragging networking and security behind, right, is one of those things that I think it used to be, right, that the infrastructure had to come first. Like you guys were saying, right? You stand up the infrastructure, and it's not until that infrastructure is there, the compute, the networking, the security, the storage, all of it is there, that the application teams can do their work. Yeah. But that paradigm has obviously shifted with cloud, because now the compute is everywhere you want it, whenever you want it. And that's what's causing networking and security to have to try and catch up a little bit. And, with joint solutions like this, that's, we're making strides towards that, like in a significant way.
So clearly my dog agrees with you, but no, one of the things that brings to mind, and Chris, I'd really like to get your perspective on this because you're closer to the technology, but as we think about that elasticity with again, Palo Alto, some of the things that we've seen through the Alkira platform, being able to auto scale Palo Alto firewalls in any cloud, right? That's something that I can't do today in our environment without this innovation from Alkira and Palo Alto. So, Chris, do you have any deeper thoughts on that?
No, I mean, absolutely. I mean, it's definitely not something that we're able to do either. I mean, us as a security team, in terms of being able to effectively use the resources that we purchased. I mean, you talk about just like HA pairs, like we struggle even doing active or finding an effective use case for it. But I mean, moving into Alkira's platform of being able to auto scale and utilize even just the HA pairs has really been an innovation that we hadn't really even considered before, but I mean, allows us to have the throughput when we need it in exactly the right quantities. So I think the dynamicness of it has really allowed us to propel forward in terms of how we're kind of looking at it to go, I mean, for the future.
Yeah, that makes a whole lot of sense.
So I want to level set a little bit. We've talked a little bit about the environment, about Koch's environment, and how you guys have structured things. But can we just do a little bit of a high level overview of the actual topology, and how the environment is structured, and then how the role it's occurring to me that we didn't really introduce what Alkira is doing as a platform and kind of how Palo Alto Networks fits into it. So maybe Matt, if you want to give us just the high level topology of what we're looking at, and then David, if you want to speak to how Alkira's platform is expanding, and then I can speak to how it fits in, or you can from a virtual firewall perspective. But I think that'd be helpful.
Yeah, and I'll talk at a pretty high level, and Chris, keep me honest if I say anything wrong here. But so we talked about like our 7 global networks. Most of that happened through acquisition, right? So in 2004 we bought Invista. In 2005 it was Georgia Pacific. We were 1 WAN. Now we were 3. Right. And so it continued to grow through that. And, we saw very little value in doing things like re-IPing to manage IP overlap and things like that. And because those efforts they help from a connectivity perspective, but at the end of the day, it doesn't really change how an end user accesses data. Right. And so it's a whole lot of work and a whole lot of money for not a clear payout. And so as we grew that way, we did pay the price of not doing those things, with some complexity. As we moved, one of the first things that we did in this transformation, I talked about decentralizing the network, and really that's SD-WAN and moving to internet circuits. So getting off of that MPLS network, that let us do a lot of different things differently, right? So first of all, obviously, from a cost of bandwidth, availability of bandwidth, those types of things that helped out. But also, how do we get from point A to point B in the network is much more orchestrated and I would say simplified and not bound to the data centers. So that started to really decentralize our network, and we started to do egress at each of those sites, where as we moved workloads to the cloud and SaaS and things like that, again, that hairpinning through the data center wasn't helping anybody, and it was really affecting user endpoints. As we moved into the cloud, some of the things that we struggle with today that, we're working through now with the Alkira platform is things like, our AWS account strategy. How many accounts, how many VPCs, how do we connect different VPCs? When do we not need to connect VPCs? And when we do, how do we insert security? There's a lot of interesting constructs that exist in AWS to help with those things, but there's not a great way to manage that at scale, right? They're all bits, parts and pieces. And that's where some of the innovative capabilities out of Alkira, like resource sharing, has been, it's something that lets us much more easily see and manage those things at scale, and then insert security services like Palo Alto in line to ensure we're protecting those things adequately. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, I think so. David, do you want to just briefly kind of give an overview of the Alkira platform, like how that creates that abstraction layer?
Right. So it's going to be some of it is going to be repeat of what Matt said, but yes, I know we kind of assumed that the audience here, they understand the basics of the Alkira solution and how Alkira and Palo Alto networks work together. I'll just give you maybe a 30 seconds or bird's eye view of that. Is that we operate what we call a global virtual network infrastructure, and that is delivered as a service. So we're leveraging a cloud provider's hyperscale infrastructure in order to build our software intelligence on top of it and establish these points of presence that are as far reaching as the cloud itself or as the clouds themselves. And each one of those points can be consumed by an organization, just like Koch is doing, is that they are consuming those points of presence to build their network. And those points of presence, they are a meeting point for all the connectivity needs, and they provide the platform for hosting network services such as the Palo Alto VM series firewalls in those points of presence, right? We call those points of presence a cloud exchange point, right? So imagine this sort of a completely distributed cloud-like network that has all of the connectivity needs and has all of the security needs through the Palo Alto integration, in it. And now once you have this, then you have your global connectivity, and then you can focus from the security standpoint, you can focus on things like, zone-based policies and continue managing your security environment exactly as you would have done had you been doing this yourself. We just eliminate all the pain that comes with provisioning, scaling, monitoring for health and availability, day two operation stuff. All of that is completely taken away from the consumer of this, and all they do is they just focus on the policy layer, be that an Alkira policy layer, which governs how the traffic is sent to the firewall, and the security policy layer, which is where customers are leveraging things like Palo Alto Panorama tools in order to manage the firewall policy itself in this sort of a zone-based security approach. And I think Chris can probably expand on how you guys are leveraging, zone-based approach in your deployment.
And that, so you read my mind, David. I was going to ask Chris about that zone-based approach, and I was also going to throw a term out there that gets thrown around a lot, which is zero trust, because I know that's something that you guys think a lot about over at Koch, and I'd love to get your perspective on how you view zero trust, how you implement it from a zone-based kind of policy layer, architectural, viewpoint. But yeah, Chris, if you could speak to that a little bit, that would be great.
No, yeah. So to the topic of zero trust networking, that's definitely a big pillar for what we strive for here at Koch, and it's definitely been a long journey coming. And it's definitely something. It's probably not a finish line that we'll ever cross, but something that we'll continue to march towards. But the really cool thing that the combined solution of Palo Alto and Alkira has really been able to brought us to shift kind of those zones of trust for us even more to accomplish that goal of zero trust networking. And by that we've been able to use the internet as our network to really been able to integrate our cloud resources with our on-prem resources, and has really we still have your trusted zones and your non-trusted zones, but rather than it being my on-prem resources being trusted and my cloud resource being trusted and everything in the middle is untrusted, we can consider the things in the middle to be trusted now because of the integration of the platform that enables that connectivity in a more of a dynamic and integrated way over the technicalities of the platform. And when you talk about the different pillars of zero trust networking, it really accomplishes the goals of that network security piece, the data security pieces, because of the automation and the orchestration of the platform.
Yeah. So it's really about making sure that those security resources are there when new things are introduced into the environment, right, and can withstand the dynamic changes. Because I know your environment is changing constantly as you support all the different businesses, and it's constantly a revolving door. So making sure that the security controls are in place when they need to be and fully provisioned is is that automation piece, correct?
Absolutely. Yeah, because we can definitely do it like by hand, but I mean, as Matt was talking about with the value stack, I mean, I can also go down to our data center and move plugs and install a firewall, but is that the most productive and valuable thing for me to be doing as a security resource? Probably not. So, I mean, it really enables us to be able to assist our customers to move faster, and then also to enable them in other capacities that are that are, I mean, we haven't even thought of yet through that automation and orchestration.
And that's an important point, right? Innovation, and the fact that this frees you up to innovate and try different things and experiment a little bit. Sorry, Matt, I may have cut you off there. I didn't mean to.
No, that's okay. I was just going to expand on that a little bit because I think this is another, and I don't want to add more to the buzzword bingo, but as we think about infrastructure as code, I think it's super important when you think about things like zero trust. We kind of view zero trust, and I think Chris articulated it well. We view it as kind of that North Star, right? It's not necessarily a place you're going to get, at least I don't know if we'll get to it in my career, but it's something that we continuously build towards, right? Because it's the right concept, the right model. Without automation and infrastructure as code, I don't know how you get there sustainably. Right. And, just like we talked about, through acquisition, we've grown these networks and we've long had a desire to flatten them. That's not zero trust. Right. And now we have tools in our tool bag that let us move more towards that in an automated fashion. I mean, the fact that the entire Alkira platform is underpinned by APIs, right? It's sky's the limit. We're not fully automated yet. I'm not going to say that, right? But certainly we see the light at the end of the tunnel there, and being able to instantiate security services from Palo Alto right in there as well. I definitely foresee the day when a application development team can stand up their own security and connectivity stack in a cloud wherever they need, without having to call IT.
It's funny that you say that. So we this is a little bit anecdotal, but we have an SE at Palo who I was talking about this recently with, and one of the things he said, working in a previous life when he was on the enterprise side, his CTO basically had a mandate that was, I will give you 2 chances basically to implement a process before we're going to automate it, right? So like if you can't get the process ironed out in like 2 tries, like then, and it can't be automated, then we're going to scrap it. It has to be automatable. I just thought that was really interesting, and definitely a change from the traditional firewall world, right? Where, when you're dealing with iron, like you were saying before, and boxes on wires, it's a different kind of world once you start moving into the virtualized space and the cloud space. And now a lot more of the time has to be spent like, okay, how do we make this repeatable? How do we make it automatable? How do we make it integrated? Again, so I can shift my focus back to policy management and designing the best, strongest security posture that I can.
Yeah, we definitely. I can echo what you mentioned, Alex. Is that we're seeing, and also you, Matt and Chris, we're seeing a lot of interest from kind of a DevOps community to drive networking and security in a more automated fashion, right? Yes, there's always this nice UIs, right? But some people want to take this even a step further, and their operational challenges are such that they want to drive everything sort of in a DevOps model, right? And do that consistently across networking and security, especially when everything is so distributed around, and especially when you talk about multi-cloud, right? So that convergence of networking and security over this Alkira platform gives them a single sort of pane of glass to automate both networking and security. So that's an interesting motion that we're also observing.
Well, I think it also kind of drives better security practices too.
Right.
I mean, even beyond like the flexibility and the scalability of it. I mean, as wonderful as people are as resources, I mean, we all have our limitations in our ability to do work and to do it consistently and to do it well. So, I mean, as we're driving, I mean, we could definitely throw more people at the problem and to hopefully drive and go faster. But I mean, you look at the implementations of even what we've done up to this point. I mean, there's inconsistencies across the board, and just due to laziness or due to misunderstanding. So I think the ability to drive more automation makes for a more consistent solution as a whole, which is therefore more secure.
Yeah. Well, I think I'd want to maybe ask you like more of a future-looking question. So we talked a lot about where you guys have been and how you guys are leveraging this converged solution with Alkira and Palo Alto Networks. So can you give us a bit of a glimpse, maybe, with what are your thoughts about the future? I know you talked about zero trust as being in your sights, but beyond that, like where do you see your networking and security evolving in the next year, 2, 3?
Yeah, I think so. I'll start at a high level and bring it back to your question. We're seeing a very significant shift in the landscape at Koch, where starting several years ago, we had this this transformation effort really started at the business level, right? Which I think is hugely important because the businesses understood that operating in today's and the future world means not just operating differently, but thinking differently about how technology and digital fits into your environment, right? So, we have continuously, invested in technology and technology-related companies, and I think that that's really changing a lot of how we think about things at a very fundamental level, right? So, rather than physical assets, which we still have, right? We also have digital IP in the form of code in some cases, right? We own software companies now, and thinking about that from a physical plant perspective to I've got code that I need to secure because that's how I make money. That changes I can't be tied up running wires and instantiating VMs and things like that, right? I have to do these as code things. And I think that being able to simplify that again for our customers, not just for our own operations, but for our customers, back to the whole DevOps piece where, in our software companies, our developers, they're the ones that are creating the next service that's making the money for Koch Industries, right? And I can't slow that down. So I want to enable them with the tools that they need to be able to apply security and connectivity solutions to their problems that I can't even imagine what those are today, right? Because they're developing faster than we can. So,
well, I think that's the really, kind of looking into the future too. I think a big portion of that Matt hit on is we don't really know what the next big thing that the companies are going to bring, and anything that we do in terms of standardization, implementation of processes that really stems that innovation is really when that value loss starts to come into play. And like that's the unknown cost of doing business of not doing automation. So I think anything that we can do to help enable the businesses to be more successful in those capacities is really what Koch Business Solutions is able to bring to the table in terms of value.
And again, from a partnership perspective, this is where we see the value of Alkira and Palo Alto of I don't necessarily have to be thinking about all those things in connectivity because that's not our core competency, but that's what you guys do really well. And what we've seen is that innovation in those platforms, right? And the ability to hit timelines in roadmaps. That's big, right? Because when we're waiting for a feature, that might be something that's holding up a business objective. So,
yeah. Mm-hmm. I love what you guys said is you expect the unexpected. You never know where the next curveball is going to come from, right? So it's been an IT challenge forever, is that you always plan for your next objective until something else comes and supersedes that, and all of a sudden you're scrambling to say, oh, how do I address that? So right, everybody's running with their hair on fire. So certainly expect the unexpected. That's it's a theme of a day.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've got about 8 minutes left here. I've got one more question before we sort of start to wrap things up and get into some key takeaways and things like that. But Before we get to that, I do want to touch on the people side of the equation, right? We mentioned that bringing networking and security together is sort of a pillar theme of this conversation. And I wanted to get your perspectives on, what that looked like in practice as you guys embarked on, your 3-step journey, right, to getting to this point where you currently are with the physical implementation of the vision, and then sort of the virtualized distributed version of that, and then ultimately the cloud platform, the cloud network. But I'm curious from a people perspective, like, what did that look like, Matt? How did you guys orchestrate that internally?
Yeah, that's actually a huge thing. We could probably spend another hour on that, right? At a high level, what I would say is talent is one of the key things that we look at Koch Business Solutions, because we do recognize that things are changing rapidly, and we don't necessarily know where we're going to be in 2 to 5 years, right? And I think talent is sometimes boiled down to skill sets, and I think that's not adequate, right? So skill sets are important for sure, but that's I would say the easier side of talent, right? Chris and I just had this conversation yesterday where I'm really looking for people who are curious, not just about technology, but about the how and why do we do things tomorrow, and that's where I think, we see different people in either different points in their career or different points in the organization that if they can't think differently, that's a way bigger problem than if they don't have the right skill set. Skill sets are relatively simple to train, right?
And I think when you look at the traditional problem of security being still a brand new concept to the new concept of technology in the world, so when you're going through your standard project management workflow, and you get done with building a new application, a new system, a new whatever, you kind of get to the end of the thing and you're like, oh shoot, let's look at the security aspect of it. So, and then I think even as we've kind of moved into the cloud space, you have the same issue with the networking aspect of oh, we built the application, we deployed it, why can't it talk to the thing that we wanted to talk to? So even networks starting to be kind of pushed off to the side. So when you talk about the people aspect of it too, for me, living and breathing in the space of trying to integrate with all these different groups and services to create successful and secure products, I think it's been a really big challenge too of trying to bring all the parties to the table to start off the game with, so that we could be successful, rather than having to come back and do the rework at the end and then feel rushed through the process and underappreciated.
Yeah, Chris, maybe how security folks always have this kind of a negative rap. It's this are always the guys that say no, right? Maybe you'll be the guy who says maybe.
Maybe. Well, it's almost one of the things of no, but it's good for you. It's it's like a loving parent. Is how I like to think about it.
Sure.
I think the key change that we're trying to make in that space, right, is understanding, if we can truly get to this infrastructure as code and build security in at that level, then security is actually helping businesses move forward faster. They're not the no in the conversation anymore.
Yeah. Absolutely. So 4 minutes left at this point. I want to give you guys a chance to just if there are 3 things that everybody listening to this should take away, what are those 3 things?
Yeah. And, I think there's, I don't know that there's a particular order, that I want to talk about these in, but what I would say is, zero trust. It's real. It's important. It's hard to get to. And I'm not sure that it's not necessarily a destination. Think about that as your guiding North Star, right? And the second one here is exactly what Chris said. Bring those teams together. And it's not even just network and security, right? It's the application team and the compute team. Bring everybody together early and often, so you have better collaboration and better outcomes. And the last one, this is kind of almost a personal joke, right, is don't go through the pain and effort we did. Skip stages 1 and 2 in our journey to the cloud and jump straight to 3, right? If you want to learn how hard versions 1 and 2 were for us, I suppose you could do that, but really jumping straight to Alkira and being able to deploy Palo Altos with a click, that's where you want to be.
Yeah, almost sounds like the slogan of, friends don't let other friends do.
Friends don't let friends build data centers. Yeah.
So for everybody watching this and listening to this, we do have some resources where you can learn more about this solution. First of all, you can see it in action, right? So you can request a demo of the Alkira platform from the URL that you see on screen here, and inclusive in that is, you can see how Palo Alto Networks and the virtual firewalls integrate into that platform. We also have a joint solution brief if you'd prefer to read up a little bit more. And then if you want to dig into what the VM series firewalls bring to the table and the virtual firewalls from Palo Alto Networks, we've got a great solution overview that can talk about just the breadth of coverage that the virtual firewalls can protect within your environments as you begin to move to more virtual and cloud heavy environments. You can check that out. Or you can take the VM series itself for a test drive using our ultimate test drive program. So you can go get your hands dirty with the actual tool, understand all the cool stuff that Chris was talking about in terms of our threat prevention services and advanced security services. Learn how to segment the environment, do advanced segmentation with our built-in IPS systems and things like that. And all of that can sort of be explored using the ultimate test drive. So definitely take a look at these critical resources. With this, I really just want to wrap it up. I want to thank Matt and Chris for joining us, and David, of course, for being my excellent co-host. Is there anything you guys want to say by way of sign off? Did we miss anything? Do we have to come back and do another one of these?
Always open to that conversation. I appreciate you having us here, Alex and David. But no, I think we covered most of those topics pretty well.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you for the opportunity. It's always fun to have the conversation.
Thank you so much, guys, and thank you, Alex, for the partnership.
Yeah, of course. Likewise. Thanks so much, everybody. Hope you enjoyed the presentation. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us.
Have a good day, everybody.
Thank you, guys.